Rain hammered the city like it had something to prove. The train station smelled of wet coats, rusted rails, and burned coffee from a machine that probably hadn't been cleaned in years. People rushed through the terminal with lowered heads and tired eyes. No one looked at anyone anymore, except him. Elias Mercer noticed everything. The old woman counting coins near the vending machine. The exhausted nurse asleep on her suitcase. The teenage boy pretending not to cry while arguing on the phone. Elias noticed people because he had spent years trying not to notice himself. At 38, he lived alone in a narrow apartment above a laundromat. He repaired watches for a living. Tiny gears, tiny springs, tiny broken things that needed patience to work again. He liked watches because they made sense. People didn't, especially after Claire died. 3 years earlier, his wife had walked into a hospital for what was supposed to be routine surgery. She never walked back out. Since then, Elias had mastered silence. He spoke only when necessary. A few words to customers, a nod to the cashier downstairs, an occasional thank you to the mailman. Some nights, he would go entire evenings without hearing his own voice. And strangely, after enough time, loneliness stopped feeling painful. It became familiar, like cold weather. You stopped fighting it and simply learned how to survive inside it. That Thursday evening, Elias stood on Platform 9, waiting for the late commuter train home. Rainwater dripped from the edge of the roof. The digital clock flickered. 7:42 p.m. Delayed again. No one complained. People were too exhausted to complain anymore. Elias adjusted the cuff of his coat and glanced down the tracks. That was when he saw her, a young woman standing dangerously close to the yellow safety line. Still, too still, she wore a long gray coat soaked from the rain. Dark hair clung to her cheeks. One hand held the strap of a worn backpack. The other trembled at her side. Elias frowned. Something about her posture felt wrong. Not distracted, not careless, defeated. The train horn sounded faintly in the distance. Most passengers instinctively stepped back. She didn't move. Elias watched carefully now. The rails vibrated beneath the platform. The headlights appeared around the bend. Still she didn't move. Then, one tiny step forward. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Enough for him. Elias reacted before his mind fully caught up. He lunged forward through the crowd. Someone cursed as he shoved past them. The train roared closer. The woman closed her eyes. And Elias grabbed her arm with both hands and yanked her backward just as the train exploded past the platform. Wind slammed against them. Passengers screamed. The woman crashed into his chest. For a second, neither of them moved. The train shrieked to a stop farther down the tracks. Rain blew sideways through the station. Elias could feel her shaking violently. "You idiot!" someone shouted nearby. "Are you crazy?" The woman stared blankly at the tracks, like she still hadn't fully returned. Elias slowly released her arm. A red mark remained where his fingers had gripped her sleeve. She looked up at him at last. Her eyes were startling, not because of their color, because they looked completely exhausted, not physically, so deep exhausted. "Aye," she whispered, but no words followed. A station guard hurried toward them. "Miss, are you hurt?" She shook her head quickly, too quickly. "I'm fine." "You almost fell." "No," she said immediately, but her voice cracked. Elias noticed that. The guard looked unconvinced. Passengers nearby kept staring, whispering, judging. The woman's cheeks reddened with humiliation. Elias understood that feeling too well. "She slipped," he said calmly. The guard looked at him. Elias kept his expression steady. "The platform's wet." The guard hesitated, then sighed. "Be careful next time." The crowd slowly dispersed. Within moments, the station returned to its usual indifference, as if nothing had happened. The woman bent down quickly and grabbed her backpack. Her fingers shook so badly, she almost dropped it. Elias noticed that too. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded without meeting his eyes, then finally said, "Thank you." 2 simple words, but they sounded fragile, like they had to fight their way out. Elias gave a small nod. Most people would have left after that. He should have left after that. Instead, he found himself asking, Do you have someone waiting for you? She looked startled by the question. Then came the answer. No. One word. Heavy as stone. Elias understood that answer better than she knew. The train doors opened. Passengers boarded. She remained frozen in place. You should get on, Elias said gently. She glanced toward the train, then back at the tracks, like they were still calling to her. Finally she whispered, I can't. That frightened him more than the near accident, because he recognized the look in her eyes now. It was the same look he had seen in his mirror after Claire died, the look of someone who no longer cared what happened next. Rain continued pouring outside. People pushed past them impatiently. The station announcement echoed overhead. Final boarding. Elias made a decision. He didn't fully understand himself. There's a diner across the street, he said. She blinked. What? They have terrible coffee, he continued. But it's warm. For the first time, confusion interrupted her sadness. You don't have to talk. He surprised himself by saying it. You can just sit there until the rain stops. The train doors closed behind them. Neither of them boarded. The woman stared at him suspiciously now. Not fearful, just uncertain. Elias realized how strange this must seem. A middle-aged stranger asking her coffee after pulling her away from an oncoming train. He almost apologized. Instead, he said quietly, You look like you shouldn't be alone tonight. Something shifted in her expression. Not trust, but recognition. As if someone had finally said the one honest thing. After a long silence, she nodded once. Okay. The diner was nearly empty. A neon sign buzzed weakly in the window. 2 truck drivers occupied a booth near the back. An elderly waitress refilled coffee while humming softly to herself. Elias and a young woman sat near the window. Rain streaked the glass beside them. A waitress approached. What can I get you two? Black coffee, Elias said. The young woman hesitated. Tea, she whispered. The waitress nodded and walked away. Silence settled between them. Not awkward, just careful. Up close, Elias noticed she couldn't have been older than 24. There were dark circles beneath her eyes. Her coat sleeve was frayed near the wrist. And despite the warmth inside the diner, she still looked cold. I'm Elias, he said finally. She stared at the table, then answered softly. Leah. A few moments passed. Then Elias asked the question carefully. Was it an accident? Leah's fingers tightened around the edge of the booth. Outside, headlights reflected through rainwater. Finally she spoke. Does it matter? The honesty of the answer stunned him. Elias leaned back slowly. No, he admitted. The waitress returned with their drinks. Leah wrapped both hands around the teacup immediately, like she needed proof warmth still existed. Elias watched steam rise from his coffee. I used to think people always wanted to be saved, he said quietly. Leah looked at him for the first time since entering the diner. And now I think sometimes people just want someone to notice they're falling. The words lingered heavily between them. Leah's eyes suddenly filled with tears. She looked away fast, embarrassed. I'm sorry, she whispered. For what? I don't know. Elias understood that answer too. A long silence followed. Then, unexpectedly, Leah laughed once. A tiny broken laugh. You know, she said, this is probably the worst day of my life. Elias took a sip of coffee. Then the coffee fits the occasion. To his surprise, she smiled, just slightly, but it transformed her entire face. And for reasons Elias couldn't explain yet, that small smile hurt his heart more than watching her stand near those tracks. Because it reminded him how long it had been since he'd seen genuine light in another human being. Leah glanced toward the rain-covered window. You really repair watches? Elias blinked. How did you know? There's oil under your fingernails. He looked down. She was right. For the first time in months, Elias found himself genuinely amused. You noticed details. Leah stared into her tea. Sometimes too many. The truck drivers laughed loudly across the diner. The waitress wiped counters. Outside, trains continued arriving and leaving. Life continued moving. But inside that small booth near the rain-streaked window, two strangers sat quietly carrying invisible wreckage no one else could see. Neither realized it yet, but this was the exact moment both their lives began changing. Not dramatically, not all at once, just slightly, like the first tiny movement inside a broken clock before it starts ticking again. The rain finally stopped just after 9. The city outside the diner looked washed clean, though Elias knew better. Cities never really changed. They only looked different under certain lights. Leah stared out the window as droplets slid slowly down the glass. "You don't have to stay," she said quietly. Elias looked up from his untouched coffee. "I know, but you're still here." The words weren't suspicious. They sounded confused, as if kindness had become unfamiliar to her. Elias didn't answer immediately. Truthfully, he wasn't sure why he stayed. Maybe because when he grabbed her arm on that platform, something inside him had awakened too. Not hope, he wasn't ready to call it that, but awareness, the dangerous realization that another human being's existence suddenly mattered to him, and that frightened him more than loneliness ever had. The waitress approached with the check. Elias reached for it automatically. Leah immediately shook her head. "No, I can pay for mine. It's tea, and arguing over tea feels unnecessary. That's not the point." Elias paused. He recognized pride when he heard it, the kind people developed after surviving too much alone. So instead of insisting, he slid the check toward her. Leah blinked in surprise, then slowly relaxed. A tiny thing, but Elias noticed. He noticed everything about her now. The way she rubbed her thumb nervously against the cup. The way she flinched whenever the diner door opened loudly. The way exhaustion seemed stitched into her posture. "You don't trust people much," he said calmly. Leah gave a faint smile. "You figured that out already? I repair watches. I spend 12 hours a day studying damage mechanisms. And people are mechanisms?" "No," Elias replied softly. "People are worse." To his surprise, Leah laughed again. A real laugh this time. Small, quick, but real. The sound caught him off guard, because he realized he hadn't heard laughter across from him in years. Not since Claire. The thought hit him harder than expected. For a moment, grief flashed across his face before he could hide it. Leah noticed immediately. "Someone hurt you?" It wasn't a question. Elias looked down at the table. "My wife died." The words landed simply. No dramatic pause. No visible emotion. But Leah's expression changed instantly. Not pity. Understanding. "That kind of hurt," she whispered. Elias nodded once. Silence settled again. Yet now it felt different. Less guarded. Like two strangers slowly realizing they spoke the same invisible language. Outside, the neon diner sign flickered weakly. Leah glanced toward the clock. "I should go." Elias looked out the window. The streets glistened from rain. "You have somewhere safe?" Again, that pause. Too long. Too telling. "Yes," she finally answered. But Elias knew it wasn't true. He didn't push further. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small business card. Mercer Watch Repair. A phone number beneath it. He slid across the table. Leah frowned. "What's this for?" "In case tomorrow feels like tonight." Her eyes widened slightly. Elias continued before she could misunderstand. "I'm not trying to rescue you." He meant that sincerely. "I just think nobody should sit alone with certain thoughts." Leah stared at the card for a long moment, then carefully slipped it into her backpack, as if it were more valuable than paper. They walked outside together. The air smelled like wet pavement and distant smoke. Cars hissed through puddles. For a few moments, they stood awkwardly beneath the diner awning. Then Leah asked quietly, "Why did you notice me?" Elias frowned slightly. "At the station." She looked away. There were hundreds of people there. The question stayed between them. "Why her?" Elias thought carefully before answering. "Because you looked exactly how I used to feel." Leah swallowed hard. No one had ever answered her honestly that quickly before. Most people lied to make conversations comfortable. Elias didn't seem interested in comfort. "I should go," she whispered again. This time she meant it. Elias nodded, then watched her disappear into the wet city streets. For some reason, he remained standing there long after she vanished from sight, as if part of him expected her to reappear. She didn't. Eventually, he walked home alone. The apartment above the laundromat greeted him with familiar silence. The radiator clanked loudly. The hallway smelled faintly of detergent and old newspapers. Elias unlocked the door and stepped inside. Everything remained exactly where he left it. One plate drying beside the sink. One chair at the kitchen table. One coat hanging by the entrance. Loneliness had routines. He removed his watchmaker glasses and sat heavily on the couch. Normally, nights blurred together for him. Tea, radio, sleep, repeat. But tonight felt different, because now, somewhere in the city, a stranger named Leah existed. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he worried whether she had made a home. The thought irritated him. Attachment was dangerous. He learned that lesson already. Still, around midnight, he found himself checking his phone. No messages. Of course not. He didn't even know why he expected one. Elias sighed and turned off the lamp. But sleep didn't come easily, because every time he closed his eyes, he saw Leah standing at the edge of those tracks. One tiny step from disappearing. And the terrifying part was this. He understood her too well. The next morning arrived gray and cold. Elias opened the repair shop at 8 sharp. The tiny store sat between a florist and a bookstore nobody visited anymore. Inside, clocks ticked endlessly from every wall. Some loud, some soft, different rhythms overlapping like tiny heartbeats. Most people found the sound unsettling. Elias found it comforting. Broken things came here to be repaired. That made sense to him. Around noon, business slowed. Elias adjusted the gears inside an antique pocket watch, while soft jazz played from an old radio. Then the bell above the door rang. He glanced up automatically and froze. Leah stood in the doorway. Her hair was dry this time. She wore the same gray coat. But somehow she looked different. Less like someone drowning. More like someone exhausted from swimming. "I almost didn't come in," she admitted. Elias removed his glasses slowly. "That makes 2 of us." She blinked. "You almost didn't come in?" "I almost locked the door." A faint smile touched her lips. There was again that tiny fragile thing that changed the entire room. Leah stepped farther inside, staring at the hundreds of clocks lining the walls. "It's loud," she whispered. "Most people hate it." "I don't." Elias gestured toward the back workbench. "You can sit if you want." Leah hesitated, then sat carefully on the stool across from him. For several moments, neither spoke. Oddly, the silence felt comfortable now. Leah watched him work on the pocket watch. "You really fix all these by hand?" "Mostly." "That seems impossible." Elias shrugged. "Everything looks impossible before you understand how it works." Leah stared at the tiny gears between his fingers. And what if something's too damaged? The question wasn't about watches. Elias knew that immediately. He adjusted a spring carefully before answering. "Then you work slower." Leah looked down at her hands. For the first time, Elias noticed faint bruises near her wrist. Old ones, not fresh. His chest tightened. He didn't ask. Instead, he asked something else. "Have you eaten today?" She looked genuinely surprised. "Why does everyone ask that like it's important?" "Because it is." Leah leaned back slightly. "My landlord says if I'm late again, he'll throw my stuff onto the sidewalk." Elias frowned. "You work?" "At a bookstore cafe." "That sounds peaceful." "It would be if customers knew how to read signs." Again, that tiny humor. Dry, unexpected, alive. Elias found himself smiling back before he realized it. Leah noticed, and for one strange second, both of them looked startled by it, as if neither expected warmth to exist between 2 broken strangers. The shop bell rang again. An elderly customer entered carrying a cracked grandfather clock component. Elias stood. "Give me 1 second." Leah nodded quietly. Elias spent several minutes helping the customer, while Leah wandered slowly through the shop. She paused before an old wall clock near the window. Its pendulum swung steadily. "Tick, tick, tick." "You know," she said softly when Elias returned, "I used to think loneliness was being alone." Elias looked at her carefully. "And now?" She met his eyes. Now I think it's when nobody notices you disappearing. The words hit him like cold water, because that was exactly what terrified him after Claire died. Not grief itself, but how the world continued moving as if she had never existed. Elias swallowed slowly. Then, before he could stop himself, he asked, "What happened to you?" Leah's face changed instantly, walls returning, pain retreating behind practiced silence. "I don't really tell people things." Elias nodded once. "That's fair." He returned to the workbench. Didn't pressure her. Didn't pry. And somehow, that made Leah trust him more. An hour later, she finally spoke again, barely above a whisper. "My mother used to say people only stay around when they need something." Elias looked up. "And do you believe that?" Leah thought for a moment, then quietly answered, "I'm trying not to." Outside, snow began falling lightly through the gray afternoon sky. Inside the little watch shop, surrounded by ticking clocks and unfinished repairs, two lonely people sat across from each other, without realizing something dangerous had already begun. Neither of them felt alone anymore. And after years of emptiness, that feeling was powerful enough to change everything. Snow covered the city overnight. By morning, rooftops looked softer, quieter. Even the traffic seemed muted beneath the pale gray sky. Elias unlocked the repair shop early as usual. But something felt unfamiliar now. Expectation. For years, every morning had been identical. Open shop, repair watches, go home, sleep, repeat. Now, while turning the sign from closed to open, he caught himself glancing toward the street, watching for a gray coat. That realization unsettled him, because attachment always came with risk, and Elias had spent 3 years carefully avoiding anything that could hurt him again. Still, around 11:30, the bell above the door rang. Leah stepped inside carrying 2 paper cups. "I brought coffee," she announced awkwardly. Elias stared. "You remembered I drink coffee? You remembered I drink tea." "Fair enough." She handed him a cup. Their fingers brushed briefly. Both pretended not to notice. Leah wandered toward the workbench while Elias removed the lid. "One warning," she said. "I bought the cheap kind. I survived diner coffee. My standards are already gone." She laughed softly. That sound no longer surprised him now, but it still affected him more than it should. Leah sat across from him while snow drifted outside the shop windows. For a while, she simply watched him repair watches, not impatiently, not awkwardly, peacefully, like she finally found somewhere her thoughts quieted down. "You really like fixing things," she said eventually. Elias adjusted a screwdriver carefully. "I like that broken things can still work." Leah lowered her eyes. "That's optimistic." "No," he replied. "It's mechanical." She smiled faintly at that. Then her gaze landed on a small framed photograph sitting near the lamp. A woman with bright eyes stood beside a younger version of Elias, both laughing, both alive in ways photographs sometimes captured too perfectly. "That's your wife." Elias nodded once. "Claire." Leah studied the picture carefully. "She looks kind." She was. Past tense. Always past tense. Leah noticed how Elias gently turned the frame slightly afterward, not hiding it, just protecting it. That tiny movement told her more than words. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Elias gave a small shrug. "People say that because they don't know what else to say. And what should they say?" He thought about it honestly. Nothing, probably. The clocks continued ticking around them. Steady, relentless. Leah wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "When my dad left," she said quietly, "my mother stopped talking for almost a month." Elias looked up. "She'd answer questions if she had to," Leah continued. But it was like she disappeared while still standing there. Her eyes drifted toward the snowy street. "I think that's when I learned silence can fill entire rooms." Elias listened carefully. This was the most she had shared so far. "She worked 2 jobs after that," Leah said, always exhausted, always angry. "I don't even think she meant to become cruel." Elias frowned slightly at the last word. Leah noticed. "It's okay," she said quickly. "She's gone now." Gone. Another dangerous word. People use it when the full truth hurt too much. She died? Elias asked gently. Leah stared into her cup. No. That answer said enough. Elias didn't push further. Again, she noticed that. And again, it mattered. The bell above the door rang suddenly. A delivery man entered carrying a long cardboard package. Mercer Delivery. Elias signed for it quickly. After the man left, Leah glanced at the box. What's that? Elias carefully opened it. Inside rested an antique wall clock. Beautiful. Hand-carved wood. Brass pendulum. Cracked glass. Leah's eyes widened. That's gorgeous. It belonged to the old train station downtown, Elias explained. They're restoring the building. Leah stepped closer. There, engraved beneath the clock face, were tiny silver letters. It stopped at 7:42, Elias said. Leah froze slightly. The same time as last night's train. For a strange second, neither spoke. The coincidence felt oddly unsettling. Leah reached out carefully toward the cracked glass. You think objects remember things? Elias almost dismissed the idea. But then he looked at Claire's photograph and remembered how he still kept her favorite scarf hanging beside the door because removing it felt unbearable. Maybe, he admitted quietly. Leah nodded slowly. I think people do too. Snow thickened outside. Customers stopped coming. The world beyond the windows blurred white and distant. Leah helped organize spare watch parts while Elias repaired the station clock. Their movements became strangely natural together, comfortable, like they'd known each other longer than a few days. At one point, Leah held a flashlight while Elias adjusted the internal gears. You missed one, she said suddenly. Elias blinked. What? She pointed. There. A tiny damaged tooth hidden inside the mechanism. Elias stared at her. That's impressive. Leah shrugged. I noticed details. He smiled faintly. Yes, you do. Something warm flickered briefly between them. Not romance. Not yet. Something deeper. Recognition. The dangerous comfort of being understood. Then Leah's phone buzzed. The sound shattered the calm instantly. Her expression changed the moment she saw the screen. Fear. Elias noticed immediately. You okay? Leah locked the phone quickly. Yeah. Lie. Clear as glass. A second later the phone buzzed again. Then again. Elias said nothing. Leah stood abruptly. I should go. The suddenness startled him. It's snowing heavily. I know. Leah, I said I'm fine. Too sharp. Too fast. Immediately, regret crossed her face. Elias remained calm. You don't have to explain. That only made her eyes shine with guilt. I'm sorry, she whispered. Elias set down the screwdriver. Did someone hurt you? Leah looked away instantly. Silence answered for her. Elias felt anger rise unexpectedly inside him. Not loud anger. The dangerous, quiet kind. The kind built from helplessness. Leah shoved the phone into her pocket. I can handle it. People who said that usually have been forced to handle too much alone. Elias stepped closer carefully. You don't always have to. For one heartbreaking second, Leah looked like she might cry. Instead, she whispered, You barely know me. Elias thought about that, then answered honestly, I know what lonely people look like. The shop fell silent again. Only ticking clocks remained. Tick, tick, tick. Leah stared at him as though trying to understand something impossible. Finally, she sat back down slowly. The storm outside worsened. Cars crawled through snow-covered streets. The city darkened early beneath heavy clouds. Elias made tea while Leah remained unusually quiet. Eventually, she spoke without looking at him. I had a fiancé once. The word surprised him. He left. Leah gave a bitter little smile. No, I did. Elias waited. He was charming when people were watching, she continued softly. Funny, confident. Everybody loved him. Her fingers tightened around the teacup. But alone, she whispered. She stopped there. Didn't need to finish. Elias understood enough. He used to apologize afterward. Leah said quietly. That was the worst part. The room suddenly felt colder. He'd buy flowers. Cry. Promise things would change. She laughed once. Empty. And every time I believed him, because I wanted the version of him from the beginning to come back. Elias felt something heavy settle in his chest. Not pity, fury, not because of what happened. Because someone had taught this girl to doubt whether she deserved gentleness. Leah looked embarrassed now. I don't know why I'm telling you this. Elias answered immediately. Because nobody listened before. Her eyes filled instantly. This time she didn't hide it. A tear slid quietly down her cheek. Then another. Elias did the only thing that felt right. He pulled a clean cloth from the workbench and placed it beside her without a word. No dramatic comfort. No forced reassurance. Just presence. Leah wiped her eyes slowly. My ex still calls sometimes, she admitted. Mostly when he's drunk. The phone from earlier. She nodded. Blocked numbers now. Elias leaned back quietly, then said something that surprised even himself. If he ever comes near you again, call me. Leah stared at him. You're serious? Yes. Why? Elias looked at the half-repaired station clock resting between them. Its frozen hand still pointed at 7:42. Because once upon a time, nobody noticed he was falling apart either. Because he knew exactly how dangerous loneliness became when mixed with pain. Because somehow, against all logic, this girl who nearly disappeared in front of a train had slowly begun bringing life back into rooms he thought would stay empty forever. But he only said, because somebody should. Leah looked away quickly after that. Not because she was uncomfortable, because she suddenly couldn't trust herself to speak. Outside, snow continued falling across the city. Inside the little watch repair shop, two damaged people sat quietly beside a clock that had stopped moving years ago. Neither realized yet that something inside both of them had already started ticking again.